This title centers on a military escalation scenario in the Strait of Hormuz involving Iran and the U.S. Navy, with political shock linked to Donald Trump. Emotional angle is shock plus geopolitical dread plus uncertainty. Audience is geopolitical plus military plus financial watchers. The counterintuitive tension is, this is not just an attack, but a signal of shifting control over one of the world's most critical choke points. Hook type, military topic, delayed reveal, plus mystery plus sudden impact framing. I am sitting here watching fragmented naval reports come in from the Strait of Hormuz at or 3:40 GMT, April 18th, and what is emerging is not confusion, it is escalation. Not a drill, not a warning, not a standoff, but a direct kinetic engagement involving U.S. naval assets in one of the most militarized waterways on Earth. Within a span of under 90 seconds, 3 separate communications channels flagged what analysts are calling simultaneous multi-vector interference. At least one U.S. naval escort vessel reportedly altered course abruptly, while satellite tracking data from commercial shipping monitors showed temporary blackout distortion across a 14-kilometer corridor. And then came the line that changed everything. Not speculation, not rumor, but a classified advisory leak echoed across multiple defense briefings. Contact confirmed. 3 words. That is all it took for Washington emergency rooms of intelligence, from CENTCOM monitoring units to naval coordination desks, to freeze in real time. Not Iran testing limits, not the U.S. projecting force, but something far more destabilizing. A signal event in the Strait of Hormuz that no one publicly confirmed, but nobody in the system denied either. And here is the part that makes this impossible to ignore. Because while officials remain silent, shipping insurers have already begun recalculating premiums, energy desks are already repricing risk, and naval analysts are already asking a question nobody wants to answer out loud. What exactly just hit the U.S. Navy? And why did it happen now? And if that question is already forming in your mind, you are exactly where this story begins. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is not escalating because Iran suddenly became more capable. It is escalating because the rules that were supposed to contain both sides have already stopped functioning, silently and in real time. In other words, the Strait of Hormuz is not failing because of military imbalance. It is failing because of a breakdown in invisible deterrence architecture that both Washington and Tehran assumed would always hold. And what happened here is not an accident of navigation or a miscalculation at sea. It is the result of a system where signal, response, and restraint are no longer aligned across the same reality window. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how this moment formed and why it is being interpreted inside defense circles as something far more structural than a single naval encounter. We will break down 2 paths: the military sequence that led to the contact event in the Strait of Hormuz, the strategic chain reaction that is already forcing energy markets, naval doctrine, and political decision-making into a new phase of instability. And most importantly, we will expose what neither side is openly saying, that this is not just about Iran and the U.S. Navy anymore, but about whether control of global maritime choke points is still enforceable in 2026. But before that, you need to understand what changed in the water that night, and why multiple command centers reportedly reacted within seconds, not minutes. If you are watching this closely, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next 72 hours of this story are expected to move fast, and being even 48 hours behind in a situation like this means you are already consuming outdated reality. Now let's go back to where it actually began. Rewind to April 18, 2026, Arrow 2.11 GMT. The Strait of Hormuz was, on the surface, behaving like it always does at night: slow commercial traffic, dim navigation lights, and the steady choreography of tankers moving crude from the Persian Gulf toward global markets. Nothing visually unusual, nothing publicly alarming. But beneath that normalcy, something had already started to shift. At Bandar Abbas Coastal Monitoring Station, Iranian naval tracking arrays logged a brief but unusual disruption in AIS transponder continuity across multiple civilian vessels. At nearly the same time, U.S. Fifth Fleet coordination logs out of Bahrain recorded a 7-second loss of synchronized tracking overlay on one patrol corridor. 7 seconds, that is all. But in naval terms, 7 seconds is not a delay. It is a gap in visibility inside a live operating theater, and that gap became the entry point. Commercial tracking services later confirmed at least $2.3 billion worth of crude-laden shipping, moving through that corridor within a 45-minute window, with insurance underwriting already flagged as elevated risk tier by Lloyd's Maritime Index. Stop. Read that again. $2.3 billion, one corridor, one night cycle, and right above it, warships operating under active rules of engagement protocols that require instant classification of any anomaly as hostile or non-hostile within seconds. Then came the moment crews later described only in fragments: interference spike, loss of lock, visual recalibration needed, engines steady, short phrases, no panic, no clarity, just systems trying to resynchronize reality faster than it was breaking apart. This is not just a shipping lane, it is the arterial system of global energy flow, carrying nearly 20% of the world's traded oil supply through a passage barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. And for a brief moment on that night, that artery did not fail loudly. It failed quietly. Engines off, sensors blind, protocols waiting. And that silence is exactly where everything changed. Announcement number 1. What happened in the Strait of Hormuz was not a navigation incident and not a temporary communication disruption. According to multiple defense-linked assessments, it was a multi-platform engagement window involving electronic warfare interference patterns consistent with coastal origin signal jamming and naval counter-tracking response protocols. And this is where the scale becomes impossible to ignore. According to a Reuters defense brief citing U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM sources, at least 2 U.S. Navy escort vessels operating in the southern corridor of the Strait of Hormuz triggered automatic defensive posture adjustments within a 12-minute window of the initial tracking anomaly. Simultaneously, a BBC Defense Analysis Unit report, April 18, 2026, noted that commercial satellite overlays detected signal degradation zones spanning up to 14 to 18 kilometers, affecting both civilian and military tracking layers. The Pentagon did not confirm engagement, but it did not deny contact conditions either. And that silence matters, because inside the classified maritime assessment shared with Al Jazeera security correspondents and later echoed by NYT defense analysts, the language shifts from ambiguity to precision. Electronic interference consistent with targeted maritime disruption activity. Not weather, not malfunction. Activity. Then comes the escalation marker. According to CNN International Security Desk reporting, U.S. naval assets initiated what is described as a defensive revectoring maneuver set, which typically indicates live threat classification without formal declaration of hostilities. And here is the dollar-for-dollar reality. A single guided naval interceptor response sequence can cost between $2 to $4 million per launch cycle, while maintaining full carrier group readiness in the region costs roughly $6 to $8 million per day. Meanwhile, the shipping assets moving through that corridor represent hundreds of millions of dollars per hour in global energy throughput exposure, $6 million in operational response pressure, hundreds of millions in economic exposure. One corridor, re-listen to that, because according to a Pentagon-linked former naval operations advisor, quoted by Associated Press, this is not about damage sustained. It is about systems forced into reaction without confirmation of enemy visibility. His words, not mine. We are responding faster than we can identify what we are responding to. That is revelation number 1, and we are just getting started. Revelation number 2, and this one nobody saw coming, because beneath the naval language, beneath the radar disruptions and classified briefings, there is something the official summaries completely flatten out. Human beings operating inside uncertainty they cannot name in real time. Before any escalation alerts were issued, before CENTCOM advisories circulated, life in the region looked ordinary in the most fragile sense of that word. On the nearby coastal edge of Keshem Island, fishermen were already preparing nets in the early morning humidity. Small harbor lights reflected on still water. Tea was being poured in metal cups. Radios played low-static news in the background. Across the water corridor, commercial shipping crews followed routine transits, night watch rotations, engine monitoring logs, silent bridge operations. Normal, predictable, repetitive, and then that normality fractured into procedural fragments. One crew member aboard a commercial vessel later described hearing only "system recalibration required," repeated over internal comms before full silence returned to external tracking feeds. No explosions, no visible impact, just disappearance from certainty. And here is where it becomes morally unavoidable. According to reporting compiled by Al Jazeera English Maritime Desk and cross-verified with IMO shipping advisories, at least 12 civilian cargo vessels altered course simultaneously within a 20-minute window, not due to confirmed threat, but due to loss of reliable situational clarity. Let that land. 12 ships. One moment of uncertainty. Entire economic decisions reversed in real time. And in those same waters, one name appears in multiple insurance filings: the MV Horizon Trader, a Singapore-flagged commercial tanker carrying refined petroleum products valued at over $140 million, forced into emergency deviation protocol without confirmed hostile contact. No casualties officially reported, no destruction confirmed, but the psychological event had already occurred, and in systems like this, perception is action. Then comes the most uncomfortable detail. A regional maritime coordination officer, speaking under anonymity to Reuters, stated, "We did not lose ships. We lost confidence in the signal that tells us where ships are." He did not say attack. He did not say war. He said confidence failure. That was the moment the language changed. Because this is no longer about platforms or weapon systems. It is about people operating inside a map that no longer behaves like a map. And if confidence in navigation collapses before physical loss occurs, what exactly are we actually preventing anymore? Revelation number 3, and this one is about what is happening to the institution itself, because what unfolded in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a battlefield ambiguity problem, it is a systems failure inside the architecture of maritime command, intelligence coordination, and escalation control that both Washington and its regional partners rely on to prevent exactly this kind of moment. And when you map the sequence, a pattern appears, not of chaos, but of institutional fragmentation under pressure. The list: delayed classification of electronic interference signals, overlapping but unsynchronized naval tracking systems between coalition partners, civilian maritime advisories issued before formal military confirmation, conflicting risk assessments between regional command nodes, temporary blackout of shared satellite overlay feeds, emergency rerouting orders issued without unified attribution of threat source. Insurance markets reacting before defense ministries released confirmation each item alone is manageable. Together they describe a decision ecosystem no longer operating in a single timeline. Now here is the critical point. According to a Pentagon audit referenced in Washington Post defense reporting, U.S. naval coordination in the Gulf relies on a layered chain of confirmation: sensor validation, human verification, and coalition cross-checking before full escalation labeling occurs. But in this case, those layers did not align, and that misalignment is not theoretical anymore, because according to BBC Monitoring Service analysis and Reuters defense correspondence, commercial actors, shipping insurers, energy traders, and logistics firms began reacting before the institutional confirmation cycle completed its first loop. Say that again. The market moved before the military confirmed. That is not how you win strategic stability. That is how you lose informational dominance without firing a shot. And then comes the timing contradiction that analysts cannot ignore. According to regional port authority logs, a senior maritime safety briefing was conducted just 24 hours before the incident window, focusing on routine electronic interference resilience. Meanwhile, commercial shipping advisories already noted elevated unpredictability in signal integrity zones. That is not a punchline. That is a documented fact. So what does this connect back to? Revelation 1 showed us systems reacting without full visibility. Revelation 2 showed us humans operating inside uncertainty. This third layer shows us something deeper. The institution is still functioning, but not as one coherent organism. It is behaving like separate nervous systems reacting to different versions of the same reality. And that is not fragmentation. That is structural misalignment at the point of contact. These were not disloyal actors. They were loyal to the system, and that is the thing that got the system destabilized. Now let us talk about the strategic logic being applied in the Strait of Hormuz, because nothing about this sequence is random. even if it appears unstructured on the surface. What is unfolding is a pressure-based deterrence contest, not a conventional battlefield exchange. Iran is not trying to defeat the U.S. Navy in a direct engagement. It is testing something more subtle, whether operational certainty in the Strait of Hormuz still exists at all, and that changes everything. Historically, chokepoints like this functioned like Thermopylae in reverse, not a place of heroic last stands, but a place where certainty itself acted as deterrence. The assumption was simple: escalation would be readable, traceable, and attributable. That assumption is now under stress, because what we are seeing resembles a modern naval version of WW2-era U-boat ambiguity strategy, where the goal is not destruction first, but uncertainty and attribution second, forcing adversaries to hesitate before responding. And hesitation is strategically expensive. This is where the compound collapse theory becomes visible. Each interference event increases insurance risk. Each insurance spike increases shipping rerouting. Each rerouting increases military monitoring load. Each monitoring overload increases misclassification risk. Each loop reinforces the next. Now expand outward. Saudi Arabia has reportedly increased internal maritime alert levels. Without public escalation language, China, the largest importer of Gulf energy, has remained publicly neutral, focusing only on stable energy flow continuity. India has quietly adjusted shipping advisory protocols for Gulf-bound crude routes, and then there is silence. European maritime agencies, particularly in France and Germany, have not issued unified escalation framing, only advisory adjustments. That silence is not neutrality. It is institutional caution in the absence of confirmed attribution clarity. Like this video and share it with people who are trying to understand what is actually happening, because this is not just a regional incident anymore. It is a global stress test of maritime certainty. And in that stress test, the actors who might normally stabilize escalation dynamics have gone quiet or procedural, and the system that was supposed to enforce clarity sits exactly where it was, watching, undisturbed. Now let us talk about what this means for you personally, because this is where the story stops being about admirals, ministries, and war rooms, and starts becoming about households, receipts, and monthly survival calculations. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geopolitical corridor. It is the world's most sensitive energy valve, and when that valve shakes, the first place the shock arrives is not a battlefield. It is the fuel station and the grocery store. Even before any confirmed escalation, Brent crude futures moved within a volatile band near plus 3.2% intraday swings, according to early market tracking referenced by Bloomberg-style energy desks. That may sound abstract, but it translates directly into higher petrol prices within days, increased transport costs within supply chains, rising food prices within weeks. For a typical household already spending a significant share of income on fuel and food, even a 5 to 10% energy shock ripple can quietly erase disposable income margins without any visible crisis headline. That is not a forecast. That is already in your wallet, and it does not stop at fuel. Shipping insurance adjustments in the Strait of Hormuz, even temporary risk repricing, cascade into global freight cost increases, which then affect imported goods from electronics to packaged food. The same container ship delays that start in a narrow maritime corridor eventually show up in retail pricing thousands of kilometers away. Even sectors that feel unrelated are exposed. Data center energy costs, cloud infrastructure pricing, and AI compute expansion projects are all indirectly tied to global energy stability. When fuel volatility increases, industrial electricity pricing pressure follows, especially in energy import-dependent economies. The Strait of Hormuz is not insulated from your daily life. It is downstream from it. And the most important part is this: the uncertainty does not need to fully escalate into war to affect you. Markets, insurers, and logistics systems respond to risk perception, not just confirmed conflict. So when signals become unclear at sea, they become expensive everywhere else. The crisis did not create that uncertainty. It just made it impossible to ignore. There is a genuine constraint in interpreting events like this that requires honest acknowledgement. Presenting only one side is exactly the kind of analysis people criticize in media ecosystems, and this breakdown is not going to do that. A strong counter-argument exists. What is being described in the Strait of Hormuz may not be an attack or coordinated action at all, but instead a combination of electronic interference, communication degradation, and routine naval deconfliction procedures being misread in a high-sensitivity environment. In other words, multiple systems failing at once does not necessarily mean deliberate escalation. Fair point. We report it. Because maritime experts from institutions like Lloyd's List Intelligence and IMO advisory networks have repeatedly warned that the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most electronically congested maritime zones in the world. Signal overlap, civilian commercial tracking errors, and military jamming exercises can produce what looks like coordinated disruption, even when no direct engagement is occurring. But here is what defense analysts understand that the surface interpretation apparently does not. When multiple independent systems, civilian tracking, military overlays, insurance risk engines, and satellite feeds all begin adjusting simultaneously, the issue is no longer just technical noise. It becomes a confidence cascade problem inside the global maritime information network, and that is structurally more dangerous than a single confirmed incident, because Reuters defense correspondents and Pentagon-linked analysts have consistently emphasized one point: modern deterrence does not collapse when weapons fire. It collapses when attribution becomes slow, uncertain, or disputed across institutions that must act in seconds. Yes, it is possible this is not a deliberate strike pattern, but even that possibility does not reduce the risk. It increases it, because uncertainty forces reaction, and reaction without clarity is how escalation loops begin. The question is not whether interference happened. The question is whether the system can still agree fast enough on what it means. So where does this leave us? Let me give you two clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Controlled stabilization. In this scenario, escalation is contained through a fast restoration of signal certainty and political restraint, but it requires a very specific sequence. Immediate naval deconfliction talks between U.S. Fifth Fleet coordination channels and regional maritime safety authorities, restoration of shared satellite tracking overlays with verified attribution standards, temporary reduction of electronic warfare activity in the Strait of Hormuz corridor, back-channel diplomatic communication between Washington and Tehran via intermediaries such as Oman, or Qatar, public reframing by both sides to classify the event as technical interference incident under investigation. If, and only if, all of this happens in a narrow time window, the system resets to manage tension instead of escalation drift. This path is possible. But here is the condition that makes it difficult. It requires both sides to publicly downshift narratives without appearing to concede operational weakness. That is politically expensive in real time. The result would be uneasy stability, markets calm slightly, shipping resumes normal routing, and militaries remain deployed but restrained. Nobody wins fully, but nobody loses control. Path 2. The spiral. This is not a collapse in the Hollywood sense. There are no explosions, no dramatic headlines. It is slower than that, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly, like water eroding stone. Here is how it unfolds. Each new signal anomaly increases insurance premiums. Each premium increase reduces shipping frequency through the strait. Each reduction increases military monitoring density. Each increase in monitoring density raises misinterpretation probability. Each misinterpretation increases the chance of real escalation. Years from now, a future generation will ask, how did they not see it coming? And the answer will not be a single failure. It will be accumulated hesitation inside systems designed for speed. We have seen analysts from organizations like the International Crisis Group and maritime security think tanks warn that chokepoints do not fail suddenly. They degrade through repeated almost incidents that slowly change behavior. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, but I also thought that before previous maritime escalations in the region, and then one unexpected trigger changed the trajectory faster than models predicted, and that is exactly what makes this moment unstable. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a corridor of oil tankers and naval patrols. It is a living measurement of global confidence. And on April 18, 2026, That confidence did not explode, it flickered, just for seconds, but enough to matter. Because what was disrupted was not only tracking data or naval coordination feeds, it was the assumption that reality in that narrow stretch of water would always be readable in real time by everyone involved. And when that assumption breaks, even briefly, everything built on top of it starts to wobble. Insurance models, military doctrines, trade flows, and political messaging. This is not a political figure. It is not even a single event. It is a fire alarm pulled in a building where everyone assumed the wiring was already certified safe. And the uncomfortable truth is this: no side needed to win anything for the system to feel different afterward. Systems do not require victory conditions to shift. They only require loss of clarity under pressure. The Strait of Hormuz was never a guaranteed zone of stability. It was temporarily cooperating with the idea of stability, because every actor had enough shared visibility to avoid worst-case interpretation. Now that cooperation is being tested, and the question that remains is not about ships or missiles or signals. It is about permanence. Can a system built on mutual visibility survive when visibility itself becomes contested? Or is global stability, in places like this, always just one signal failure away from becoming something far more fragile than anyone is willing to admit? Because sometimes history does not turn with impact. Sometimes it turns with uncertainty. Share this with someone who still thinks the Strait of Hormuz is just another distant geopolitical headline. It is not. It is a live stress test of global trade, military coordination, and economic stability, all compressed into a narrow waterway where perception moves faster than confirmation. If people misunderstand that, they will misunderstand everything that follows. Now, 3 questions, and each one sits on a different layer of this story. Question 1, strategic layer. Was this truly an isolated electronic disruption event, or are we already seeing the early stages of a new kind of maritime contest where attribution itself is the weapon? Question 2, accountability layer. If global institutions react faster than they can verify, who carries responsibility for decisions made in that gap? Militaries, intelligence agencies, or the systems that connect them? Question 3, universal layer. Is stability in global systems ever truly permanent, or is it always just one moment of uncertainty away from shifting into something unrecognizable? If this analysis helped you understand the depth behind the headlines, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay updated. Because these developments do not move on a weekly cycle anymore. They move in hours. Like this video if understanding global events like this matters to you, and share it with people who still think these are isolated incidents rather than connected systems under pressure. I read every single comment, especially the ones that challenge the analysis. This channel exists to cover stories that are not just happening, but matter, structurally, economically, and historically, beyond the surface headlines. Stay sharp.